welcome back to another episode of Master Your Life with Kate McKay. I'm Kate McKay, and I am so thrilled to be introducing my guest today, Rick Smith. Welcome, Rick.
Thanks for having me, Kate. Excited to be here.
Me too. So as it always goes, before we generally hit the record button, we chit chat. And half the time I'm always like, all right, wait a minute, we got to hold on. Let's save this for the recording. So just a little bit about Rick, and then we're going to get right on after it. He has an incredible story to share with us. So Rick is a former professional hockey player, a former addict with drugs and alcohol, and has been sober since February 17th of 2003. Wow. Guest speaker. He's a certified in change psychology as a behavioral change coach, an author of Behavior Change Impacting the Next Generation. That's his commitment. And he's married for 16 years and is the father of an incredible human, his son, and who I know I'm looking forward to learn about through you, actually, Rick. So welcome again, once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So let's just get right after it. This is a show dedicated to the powerful stories that we live through of grit, determination, hardship in order to stand in this place of mastery. And what would you share with us, Rick? Was that one of the major pivotal moments for you?
Yeah, so I had a transitional moment in relation to my drug and alcohol addiction. First, back in the summer of 1999, I had just turned 21 years old, had a big party at the house. My parents were up at our family cottage over in Canada across the border. I'm just 45 minutes west of Detroit. So it normally took about 4 hours to get to the cottage there, but I had witnessed my dad, growing up, child of an alcoholic, a lot of dysfunction on both sides of the family through drinking. And so my dad ended up getting sober at a certain point growing up. And I saw, of course, the changes that were going on with him, just his demeanor, how he approached things. Dad was never an angry drunk by any means. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't that type of drunk. He was more of like a happy drunk. But of course, the dysfunction with my mom and, her, that tension in the home of just that playing a role of the addiction dad, so to speak, really was impacting all of us and my
Right.
siblings.
Well, I love that discernment, right? And you hear that all the time. Well, they weren't a mean drunk. They were a happy drunk. So,
Right.
and that means
So it
that's
must be
not
okay.
as bad,
Yeah.
right? But
Yep.
but what would you say? What were those, no matter what, if you have a parent that's checked out, right? Even if they are quote unquote a happy drunk, and that means that people like them, they were functioning at some level, right? What
Sure.
does that do to a person? For you, let's just say, Rick, as a young person, where did that affect you, that unpredictability?
Yeah, so there was times where, and it was always, my dad even talked about it today, it was when mom would go out of town. And so dad would take that liberty. And, I vividly remember he had this beautiful built-in stereo in our old home. And dad's voice, like dad's got a great voice, great singer. And he was in a band growing up, played the drums, played the guitar. But there was one night where he was singing at the top of his lungs. The stereo system was just blaring, through the house. And he probably was thinking he was singing to, 50,000 fans at his concert. And it was a Jimmy Buffett song, Margaritaville, I think.
Wasted Away.
Yeah, Wasted Away in Margaritaville. And so in those moments, like he's all happy singing, but I knew dad been drinking. And then, as a kid, you're like, oh boy, mom really wouldn't like this right now, There was moments where we wouldn't say anything, when mom would come home. So there's just kind of that icky feeling of, man, I didn't do anything wrong, but I don't want to tattletale on dad. But at the same time, like mom needs to know about this. So there was that internal conflict going on, even at such a young age. So that's where that big pink elephant in the room, people didn't want to talk about things because everybody wanted to be happy and didn't want to have any conflict inside the home.
Yeah, guilt and shame turn inward, man. It's a nasty little combination. It's a nasty cocktail.
It is.
Yeah, definitely. So what was that, going back to that summer? There was a big,
Yep.
you were having a big party, or what was that?
Yeah, and I going back, I watched my dad get sober. I saw the transition, the transformation that he had in his life, this complete evolvement into a new person. And so I knew that it worked. And that was kind of like in the back of my mind, like, okay, dad's done this, maybe I need to do this for myself. And I had just signed my first ever professional contract to play hockey. And so the progression of what I was doing with my drinking at that time just continued to get worse. And I said to myself, I need to go like have an adult time out here, get my, life in order essentially, if I'm going to give this hockey thing, a shot.
Mm.
And
Well, how
so
bad was it, Rick? I mean, to get
at,
to get at that point in time, especially at age 21, I mean, you did have this light of hope because you saw someone do it. And that's why I say amen to anyone who is a
yeah,
parent that has the ability to get sober for their child. Listen to the impact it has on someone.
for sure.
Right here, man. It's right here. If you can instill, or if you know somebody that knows, listens to, needs to hear this, please, know that if you make a change and you have someone watching you, and you always do, we all do have people watching us,
We
listen
do.
to the difference of that hope.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good. You know, uh, I had some other slips within my career where I was traded away. I was released from hockey teams, and still, those weren't changing the behaviors that I was demonstrating outside the hockey arena with my drinking. My drinking had escalated to the point where I would black out. If I really wanted to ham it up, so to speak, I'd mix in the liquor, and that's where, for me, I just didn't mix well with that. I like to say that I had an allergy to it because
Mm.
who I was sober was definitely not the same person.
Was it you just didn't have an off switch? I'm just fascinated
No,
by this because what is it for because I'm from a family of addicts, but I have an off switch. Like I'd rather eat dessert. Like it's like people like, let's have another cocktail. I'm like, can I see the dessert menu?
yeah, yeah,
I mean, that's just who I am by nature. But
yeah.
can you describe that, Rick, what that is like to make that decision? Because there has to be some level of decision that this is blackout time. Like I'm going to go to a place. What is that place?
It's a place of not loving myself, not caring about myself, and I don't care if I die or not.
Mm,
It's like a ball and chain that I just keeps
mm,
dragging around, right? It's like almost being in prison
mm.
mentally. And so, you're like, okay, I know what this did to me last time. I'm not going to do it again. And then you start getting closer to the time of, okay, let's pick up some booze. And you're like, here we go. We're going to tie one on again, And so it's just that insanity. It's like that gerbil being in the cage, spinning around. Yeah. I want things to change? I did, but I wasn't making any changes to have a different outcome. And so, yeah, my 21st birthday was the big blowout. My uncle knew that my parents were out of town, and he actually came over the next day and wanted to take me to the hospital to go get my stomach pumped. And I said, I'll get some pizza in me or something and have that soak up the alcohol, and I'll be good. But the home was a wreck. And
The
for
place in
me,
your house was trashed.
yes, holes in the walls, there's empties everywhere. When I tell you, like, people still remember this party today, 20 plus years ago, like they still talk about it because it was just there was cars. It looked like a parade of cars that went from the beginning of the subdivision and wind all the way through to my home. The cops showed up that night. I mean, yeah, there was 100+ people in that home, if not more, 4 or 5. So yeah, let me look on the admit date. So my birthday is July 29th. And I admitted myself. I checked myself into rehab on August 3rd of 1999. And so I was sober when I went in. I didn't have to go through, of course, they want to make sure that you're okay before they let you into the unit and you're with other people. And so they put you in a detox environment, which I was in there with a guy who was coming off of heroin, and I'm watching him just shake and whatnot. And even in that moment, I'm like, well, that's where it can lead to if you want to keep going down that path.
Oh, brutal, brutal, brutal.
Brutal. Yeah. I've had many friends, that heroin addicts and whatnot. But all that to be said, I was in there for 30 days in treatment at Hazelden, a facility in Minneapolis, Center City, Minnesota. And that's where my dad had gone. And that's, of course, he had success there. And that's where I wanted to go. Pretty Penny even at that time, I believe it was just over like $25,000. So my parents footed the bill for that. I played my first year essentially sober of hockey, and I had never done that before in my career. So, I was turning, yeah, I just turned 22 years old at that
Mm.
point. It's a tough environment, and I'm not putting excuses on it. I know guys that have played and that were completely sober, but when I tell you it's a very small group of individuals who can do that, and I'm talking like two guys I ever knew out of all the athletes I played with. It's not a conducive lifestyle to try and stay sober. Where do you
Is it
go after the
still
game?
like that?
I
I mean,
think
do you think
that
most sports do have that, play hard, work hard, play hard, masculine
it's
thing?
still there. I know it
Yeah.
to be true because I know some people that have shared that with me. But what's been enlightening, I think, for a lot of athletes is that there's been more that have come to the surface that have talked about their struggles with their drinking and drug addictions, which has made it
Mhm.
easier to be a conversation instead of something that, oh, you know what, we're going to just kind of be hush hush about this and not say too much about it, which is unhealthy, first of all. But the conversations in and around, people having issues is now like great. They're getting help, and it's not
Totally.
frowned upon that someone's getting help. So, for me, I wasn't doing all the necessary things that I needed to do, though, once I got out of Hazelden, and it talks about it in my discharge papers. But, going to support group meetings, have a mentor or sponsorship. I stopped returning phone calls. And at that time, I didn't have a cell phone. It was an answering machine, So people would be leaving messages from back at home that were sober, trying to help me from a distance. And I just stopped returning phone calls. I was still sober, but I was just like, I was white knuckling it is what they call
Mm.
it. And I wasn't doing any internal work on Rick. I was still going to the bars after games. I was still a smoker at that time, smoking cigarettes and drinking energy drinks essentially.
Yep.
And then, as they say, the longer you hang around those places, it's not going to be too long thereafter where you're going to find yourself picking up another drink. And that happened about 6 months, 7 months later.
Well, let me ask you a question about that,
Yeah.
because it's the environment. You hear it all the time. It's the
Mhm.
environment, and I think you and I talked about this. There's an incredible book out there called Tribe, and I think it's by Sebastian Younger, but it's a brief story, because he's a great storyteller. He's just incredible. He wrote The Perfect Storm. So anyone who's listening, check out this really short, amazing book called Tribe. And it's particularly in our culture where we don't have the rituals of men turning, how do we help men become men and use the testosterone and teach men how to bond in healthy ways, in ways that are authentic to men. And, as you and I have talked about, I lost my son to suicide at 20, he was 22. He wasn't a drugger, right? But he still had some separation issues, clearly, right? That he was suffering at some level to do what he did. Even though it had a spiritual element, it still is. It's like a good drunk or a good suicide or a bad suicide. Still,
Right.
he's still dead, people. Right.
Right.
That's the reality for me. I still got to be like, my son's gone. And what are the ways that we can support men build that sense of tribe in ways that are healthy, in ways that they can communicate? And I know you know this because your specialty is behavioral change, but it's a whole concept that men do communicate different. A lot of their communication is by playing sports side by side, watching sports side by side, sitting in a bar stool side by side, being in the friggin' war in the front line side by side.
Mhm.
That's how men communicate a lot of times. Why is it that we don't allow men to be able to create culture like that, where they can have powerful conversations and communicate their truth? And all you had for you was the tribe of the sport. You didn't have another tribe to go to. Where was the other tribe? You don't
Right.
want to go to AA tribe.
The beautiful thing in the relationship that I have with my father, and I know it's very unique and special because I know the stories out there that don't have the relationship that I do have with my father. At a very young age, my dad taught me prayer. We don't follow a certain religion, but dad he had his own experiences that transcended himself. And so for me as a kid, I grew up with dad teaching me prayer when we were going to sleep. What are you grateful for the day? Give thanks, those type of conversations. And in and around the dinner table. It was always a family environment. And so when you're talking about tribe, I immediately think about my family,
Mm.
because even through all the dysfunction, even through all of the stories and the nonsense, they still love me at the core. Like my dad would even say to me, I really don't like you right now, but I still love you. And it's super powerful, but these are the type of conversations where, I know many other men out there that didn't have these conversations. It was either get hit, beat, or, stop crying. Like these type of conversations that are so unhealthy. My dad's story, he's written his book, but man, does he need some help, because he's gone through some things where you would just be like, even counselors and therapists had said to him, how are you even doing what you're doing today? Because what you have gone through is normally somebody who, might off themselves still in addiction, all of these type of things. And so what he did is he turned that energy on what his parents, showed him, these learned behaviors, and he completely changed it generationally with how he treated me,
Oh my gosh.
but then also how he treated my siblings.
Mm.
My conversations with my parents, like they know everything about me. My mom might not like that so much, but
Mhm.
she's asked questions about the past, and going through it with my dad, then going through it with me, then going through it with my brother who's now sober. So all three of us are sober, but
Yes.
she went through the ringer with all three of us. And then of course my sister, which I would consider her more of being like a normie. She had her moments, but wasn't anything like having to go to treatment facilities or anything
Right.
like that. So
Wow. Your mother had, we all have our paths,
mhm,
it's just, it's pretty incredible. And as you and I had mentioned, and we talked about this, that when I interviewed, dozens of men for my book, there was not one man that said, my father was my role model. It was, I became the man that I am in opposition to who he was. And maybe I had a coach, or maybe they learned about being a man through their peers, and how
right,
hard and unfulfilling will that be if you're all stumbling towards Bethlehem without someone who's role modeling what it means to speak truth and live honestly and live with courage.
for sure. Yeah. If I have literally saved letters from when, I moved away from home when I was 15 years old, chasing the NHL dream. And I went from a super rural, small town area at the time, which is now built up. But then I go to this metropolis of Toronto, Canada.
Wow.
It was a big transitional moment, culture, just logistically from getting around. And so all that to be said, but my dad was always very good at communication. He's a therapist today.
Oh,
He's,
that's so good. I was thinking, let's do a three-way interview. Be
yeah.
freaking so powerful.
Oh, that
I
would be
love
so
that.
good.
Oh my God, we'll have so much fun. So
Yeah.
I have a question for you, because I
Yeah.
think that it goes back to the whole sport analogy and the sport tribe and your culture. So at that age, your initiation was actually through sport at 16. Yeah. I mean, going off, right? You went off to war, and you went off to,
Actually,
right?
yeah.
Right. And so what is that journey home when you have your identity as a hockey player? And obviously you were a big fish in a small pond, leaving the small pond, and then you went up into this big pond. But then how do you think that reflected your transformation into your manhood? What was the implication of that?
So that was this is a really good question, because I literally had to go through a process with being counseled, not with my father, but a different professional counselor at that time. I had this identity locked in as Rick being the hockey player, and that's all I knew. So this was very challenging, because leaving home, oh, you're Rick the hockey player. Like I've heard
Mm.
about you, Rick the hockey player. And I heard that over and over and over again. And so, in the back of my mind, like I remember conversations I had with my father too, though. He's like, look, this hockey thing, even if you go all the way, it's going to end at some point. You got to have other things that you're, passionate about, and other things that you want to do. And in my mind, I was thinking to myself, like, this is all I'm doing. I live, breathe, eat, sleep, hockey. This is it. The whole identity crisis in Rick being the hockey player was very tough, because some of the people that you see behind me on the wall here, my great uncle to my grandpa to my father, like they all played. We had 6 relatives that played in the NHL, others that played collegiately, and the list goes on. And so one day when that's basically taken away from you, you're standing there like almost being completely naked in front of everybody. And like, what do I do now? Okay. You
Mm.
you're in a very unusual, uncomfortable situation, an environment in your mind that is unhealthy. And so I had to go through literally had to grieve myself of
Mm.
Rick, the hockey player, this identity that was all wrapped up into me. And so, I was having issues with figuring out like who Rick really was as a person, where I was going with my life. People use this extreme word called existential, but really all it means is, what purpose do I have in my life? And
Yeah,
so
who the freak am I now?
who am I?
Existentialism, I mean, just like, now what?
Yeah, yeah,
Like, wait a
totally.
minute, I'm hockey, but now what?
Yeah, my life's
Oh,
over. So I was literally, as the counselor said to me, she said, you are grieving death is what you're
mm.
grieving, because you're grieving the person that you used to be. Now you're saying goodbye to it. And that is literally in the same.
Looking for a motivational and inspirational speaker to host your next event? Reach out to me at kate-mckay.com.
Context of grieving somebody who has died. And when I tell you, like, shedding tears, it was just an emotional time in my life, because I knew this was it. And I was in this transitional moment. Like, what am I going to do?
When was that, Rick? In the midst of, like, how long did you play hockey? Through when? When was this time for you, this identity?
I came out of retirement, but it was right around when it would have been probably in 2001, somewhere in there, in that time frame. And what's interesting is I did come out of retirement a couple other times, still kind of hanging on, but I was sober. So I played hockey sober. I played professionally sober again. That was monumental in itself, because I didn't even know if I could play sober again. Could I be the same hockey player? Could I be the same person?
Wow. Were you drinking when you were skating?
Not when I came out of retirement.
But people often having a buzz on when they were skating, drinking?
It would
Before a
just be
game?
more after like a game,
After,
and
yeah.
yeah, I mean, there would be certain times where you're on the road and guys want to go out and things like that. But I got to play sober, and I met my wife actually because of me coming out of retirement. And so all that to be said, like, she's never seen me drink or drug. She's only seen sober Rick. Now, look, I mean, I've got character defects just like the next person. I'm always constantly working
What,
on
you're
my
not perfect, Rick?
Yeah, right. And by the way, I'm not chasing that anymore.
Amen.
That just sets you up for self-sabotage. That was a big moment in my life, where that was a huge transitional moment for me in that period of time of just letting go of Rick, the hockey player. I was finally at some point where I could watch the TV and see guys that were teammates of mine that were playing in the NHL, where I wasn't angry anymore. Because that was one of the things out of my discharge papers has issues with anger. It was one of the top things. And so that all is just generated from playing in the NHL, always having that being the ultimate goal, not the ultimate goal of happiness inside of me, right? This shiny object of raising that Stanley Cup over my head, right? Shiny objects.
But what's the middle way, though? Because, and this is what I'm very, very curious about, because obviously you have an expertise in behavioral change. It's my thing too. I love it. But when you're still wanting to claim your warrior and like still have that little piece of David Goggins in us, because I think people who are athletes, like, I have that edge. So it is not always pretty when I am not doing my best. And I don't always have nice languaging to myself to motivate me. But I realize that's not going to the core of me with self-hatred. It's calling out my highest self. And sometimes that doesn't have nice words. So people, I can't really tell people that's the way that I talk. I'm saying it now, but there are times when I'm like, Kate, you piece of grind it. Like, what are you doing? Like, I talk to myself like that, but at the same time, I'm kind of laughing. Like, I'm not, but there is a middle ground. So what is that for you? And how would you teach that as a man, as a warrior, how we still have that edge to push, to be, and to live in excellence?
If I were to go back, and I've had this question asked before, if I were to go back and try and help out my younger self, which, I had a great role model, a great dad. Of course, you're going to grasp and internalize and process things differently at a younger age than you do at, in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. What's going to sink in? I think going back, it would be, don't leverage and put all your chips into one basket as far as, you achieving, raising that Stanley Cup or playing in the NHL. Like, keep driving, keep having that passion, but start doing things that are going to feed into your mind, body, and spirit, not just all hockey related. Because I can tell you, I was watching guys when I would be on that bus when we'd be traveling, playing in the minors, and I'd see these guys, they were reading books. They were, taking a couple online courses. They were doing things that were exterior from what was going on inside the locker room or on the ice. And I'm like, I'm going to go play cards in the back of the bus. And, I'm going to play Tiger Woods on the PS2. And that's where I'm, spending my time. Or, when I was in Birmingham, you could basically almost play golf year round. So I was going to the golf course, or going to the gym to work out. And again, all exterior things instead of working on the internal, Rick. And so that's where I feel like for men, chase it, still have that hunger, still have that drive, have that lion inside of you, but work on what's going on the things that maybe your father didn't teach you on how to communicate in a healthy way, which means it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to talk about these things that are going on inside your head instead of just, putting them to the side and disregarding them or being desensitized to these things that are going on internally. And then find a group of people that are doing the same thing. Find a group of people that you can look up to that can mentor you and take you through the process on kind of what that looks like.
I love that. Yeah. And you have to find those people. It's the quote you hear is that you are a reflection of the 5 people that are around you. But
Sure.
I heard another athlete, football player say this. It's like, you actually are a reflection of the people that you expect to have around you. And there is a psychological term called positive expectancy.
Yes.
And we actually have to reframe that sometimes moment to moment. I this morning I was like, I got all these things to do. I was like, I don't feel like it. How am I changing up my state? So what would you, if the viewers listening, what do you want them to know as far as the middle path to still own that warrior, the expressive human, and still win, and still wanting that sensation of winning with the Stanley Cup, even if it's not through hockey, but still feeling like you have that drive in you, because that's the challenge, isn't it?
So here's the thing, and this is great because the Stanley Cup in hockey is the end of the line. That's the you have finished. That's amazing if you get to that point. That is the climax, the ultimate Mount Everest. What people miss is these little wins along the way through the journey. The journey is the win. The journey is the process of winning. It's not essentially, you'll hear Usain Bolt, when he was interviewed, and if you watch his background, it's the training where he's puking on the side of the track. He's going back another day to go pound himself. He'll talk about the event is the easiest thing. It's the process of going through the journey because it's not easy. But for me, mentally, and what I help people do is I help them break that down. So what are you doing over the next 24 hours? When you wake up in the day, how do you start your day? Are you turning on the news? Are you turning on something negative? Are you speaking negatively to yourself? So for myself, I do 4 things. I pray in the morning. I read out of the Bible. I read some scripture. The third thing I do is I read a men's devotional. And then the fourth thing I do is I read what's called the 24-hour reading. And so it gives you just something to think about, a little meditation for the day, and then prayer for the day. And then like this morning, I'm going through a book right now and it's on growth. I'm always continuing to evolve. I want to continue to get better. I heard something not too long ago where people put themselves into this comparison thing with other people. And this is where they also fall into not thinking that their value is where it should be because they're basing it upon looking at somebody else or again, graphing, like you talked about earlier, graphing themselves against somebody else. We have to make sure that we're managing that just by what we're doing with the 24 hours that we have. And so if I'm getting better than the person that I was yesterday, what that really means is I'm chasing myself for the rest of my life. My future hero is who I'm chasing. It's the Rick from 10 years from now, because I keep doing the work on Rick. And so that's where, like, for me, it's not going to be this Stanley Cup moment anymore. It's going to be my win is the journey. So I think once people wrap their head around, instead of it getting like, if I just get this car, if I just get the big house, if I just had a relationship with this person, it's finding the happiness within myself, but then understanding like these little wins along the way, people don't truly value that enough. They're just thinking about these massive wins.
It's true. So it's like breaking it up. So how would you describe behavioral change as a process? I think it's wonderful now that we've moved into a space where we now have science behind the work of a coach.
Yeah.
And I think that that has been a hindrance for the field, and that has rapidly changed. In fact, it's becoming one of the highest growth industries there is. But there is science and research behind the work, founded predominantly in psychology. And I love it too, that we also incorporate the spiritual element, because I believe we have to, like, whatever that spirit is, there's something within you that drives you forward. Whatever this energy is, there is something that drives you. And to deny that is to deny the fact that you are a unique light. So why would anyone deny the unique light? Well, we know self-sabotage, self-hatred, self-loathing, guilt, shame, all of these in the core beliefs of who we are. We can change habits. We can say, oh yeah, Rick, I can just pray and I'm going to be like you, right? People are like, yeah, you have no idea what kind of life I've had, Rick, right? You hear that, you know that that's what sometimes people are thinking. What would you say to those people into their heart? What do you want them to know?
So I had some of those same thoughts. I thought I was unique, and I am unique in a way, but not to the extent that nobody on this planet has gone through what I've gone through. That's false. Really what it comes down to in regards to this question is, first of all, in regards to the faith, like, that's the one thing I've always respected with people. I can believe in something completely different than the next person, as long as there's love and we're taking care of other people at the center of that, and we're being a good human being, we're taking care of others, we're going outside our self and doing selfless deeds. This is kind of like, it's something that's outside of us, so just something that's greater than myself, right? And I think that being kind of the catalyst of what you were talking about, all those things, self-loathing, sabotage, that gets you outside of yourself. It's got to be something other than yourself that you're believing in, whatever that higher power looks like for you. So for me, of course, I choose that to be God, but that doesn't mean like I'm spilling that over and trying to convince somebody of doing the same thing that I'm doing. And so, in that context, when we transition into, that whole behavioral change side of that, it's understanding what the stages of behavior change are. So I think once we identify and we can have an understanding of what that looks like, then we can kind of take a step back and go, oh, yeah, I can identify with what you're talking about here, because the 5 stages of behavior change are the 5 stages. Like, there's no getting around, and it's not me having an opinion about it. It's like, here's the facts, here's the science.
Can you just name those off, if you don't mind, just so that the viewers have that? And obviously you guys reach out to Rick. I'll be sharing his information if you want to dig in. It's amazing stuff.
Yeah, number 1 is pre-contemplation. So this would essentially be somebody who is like saying, and there's a couple different ways of looking at this. This could be somebody, behavior, attitude, whatever it might be. Oh, I don't need to make any change, I'm fine. There's nothing there. Or pre-contemplation could be, you've been wanting to write a book and you've been sitting on it for the last 5 years and you're still stuck because you just haven't taken any actionable steps on it. So that's kind of pre-contemplation. Number 2 would be contemplation. This would be like, okay, I kind of see like this behavior is really not adding value to my life right now. Like, maybe there's something there, but I'm still not 100% ready for change.
Yeah.
So that would kind of be, again, that's going to be your second step of that being in contemplation. And number 3 would be preparing for action. So this is going to be somebody who is reaching out, to somebody like we talked about earlier. You're trying to find somebody in an environment to where, okay, I want to make those changes. Well, you see somebody that's having success, I'm going to reach out to that person and have them help me, guide me, mentor me. So that would be preparing. That would be that number 3, preparing for action. And then number 4 would be taking action. So this is literally somebody's in the process of taking those actionable steps that mentor or therapist or coach or whoever that is, they're moving you in that direction. They've given you the guidance and now you're applying it. And then number 5 would really be in that maintenance phase. So, I'll just use my example. Got sober February 17th of 2003, and I've been sober now all the way up until this day right now. So that's the maintenance phase of behavior, of the 5 stages to behavior change. And that can really be, and I say short window because it is within the first year, but 6 to 12 months. And then once we get beyond, now we're in that maintenance phase and we've accomplished whatever that attitude, that behavioral shift that we've made. Now we're in that maintenance phase and, you're cruising, everything's going well. You keep working on yourself in that environment. Maybe you find something else you want to start working on and get out of that procrastination.
Or life will just hit you with the old cosmic 2x4 right outside the head, and you're gonna have to go right back to it.
Yes.
So it's I love that. So it's the evolution of change, and the bottom line is, life will either knock you down, or you're gonna do something that's gonna knock yourself down. So I would suggest being the one that takes charge of knowing where you need to make change. So if you have a health issue right now, you haven't called the doctor yet, how about you pick up the phone? How about you're in a relationship that's not jamming? You're not connected, you're not having sex, you're not feeling any kind of communication. It's the courageous one that's going to speak the truth and decide to shift and change that for better.
Yeah.
Or if it's, your relationship with your children,
Yeah.
or you're not having any self-care, self-honoring, self-respectful behavior with yourself, what's it going to take for you to say, the highest level of freedom is for me to look within, not to resist what's outside of me,
Right.
but to understand that the sacred path to the introspection is the most important one. We can
Absolutely.
fight and be warriors against restriction and and fight like warriors in that way, but as one of my really dear men that I interviewed says, behind every warrior knows, the best warrior knows that there's a heart behind the shield, right?
Yes.
We have to know the heart. We have to be able to speak the emotional truth. We're somatic beings. We feel things first. That's the way we are built. So
Yeah.
how do we disrupt the pattern of non-feeling and move into that place of feeling and knowing that it's going to suck and it's going to be amazing?
Yes. All at the same time.
Yeah, right. So true. So excellent. So talk a little bit about like what you're working on. Who are the people that should be reaching out to you and ways that they can play with you, Rick?
Yeah, there's many different avenues. I do speaking engagements to where, I work with sports teams to different organizations, helping people just get past fear. What does behavior change look like? Kind of some of the things that we've been talking about today, whether it be, look, we're in the prime time of getting into the new year and people wanting to make change, right? So what do we do, for that? But then also, how do we maintain that? But yeah, from athletes to workout enthusiasts, business, entrepreneurship, the many different people that I've come in contact with that I help through that process, whether them, wanting to become more fit, they've been sedentary, to people trying to get their life back nutritionally because they've gone to a doctor and they've had a health scare. So what does that look like? But then also the mental side of things. So yeah, many different walks of life we're able to basically take them through the process of what that change intake would look like, and then what are the actionable steps that we're going to move forward on to get you to where you need to go.
And what about, we'll obviously include social media. So a book in the works, a book to play with. I mean, what would you?
Yeah. I authored a book called Behavior Change, Impacting the Next Generation. That's on Amazon and Kindle. Currently in the process, which, I'm waiting on some responses here with some literary agencies right now. So we'll see what happens with that. But I have the book written. It's just a matter of if it's what part of 2023 it's going to get out, first, second, third, fourth quarter. But it's my actual autobiography. So we're going to be diving deep on that, and excited for that. That's one of the big projects I'm working on right now.
And I love it that you just found your release papers. What in that, just what was your biggest aha, and reflecting on that person of who you were? I love it that you found this just recently, but what would you want people to know as you read that and, and find grace in that younger version of you? So
I'm actually going to read it line by line, because this is actually from the counselor in my discharge papers, but it was in regards to group therapy, but then also individual counseling. But it said that I recognize the extent and severity of self-defeating consequences. Was moved to the next problem area of grief and loss as a block to trusting myself and then others and a higher power. I was able to begin to recognize that I needed to grieve over life's past experiences. And when you talk about men doing this, That is not very common.
No, it's not.
And
And
so-
we're gonna change that up, Rick.
Yes.
We're changing it up. Legit. That's so powerful. So what if you had a billboard, Rick, what would you want it to say?
Evolve.
Evolve.
Evolve. That's been my whole life, from when I made my transitional moment. And as my father would always say to me, there was a saying down in our basement, after having a great game or even having a whatever type of game it was, of course, playing hockey, it would say you only have 24 hours to be a hero. And so it was just a reflection moment, like, okay, cool, you played well, but what do you need to do tomorrow? You got to get up and you got to do it all over again. And so that's been my life, ever since transitioning out of, my bad behaviors, when I made my behavior change of drugs and alcohol. And so it's another 24 hours. How good am I today? What am I doing today to move that needle, further closer to that person I'm chasing into the future? And again, it's just
Which is
all about
you.
evolving. It's me.
Which is you.
Yep.
I love that. I love that. I wrote that down just because it's such a powerful image, that is my future hero is who I am chasing.
Yes.
That's
So
and we gotta figure out ways to fire that up. We gotta fire that. We gotta find the fire in the chase. And that's
Yes.
exactly what you do in your work. And I'm super grateful that you've spent this time and shared so honestly and transparently with me. Just
Well,
want to
thank you
thank you so
again.
much, Rick.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys and your listeners.
Thank you. And thank you to all you viewers and listeners of Master Your Life with Kate McKay. And remember the one word as we move forward into this day, evolve. You're worth it. Your greatness awaits. Take good care. And thanks again. And see you on the next episode.
Is it time to claim your inner warrior? Please grab my latest copy of my book, Claim Your Inner Warrior, available now on Amazon.